Gareth Pugh and I'm a fashion designer. I grew up in Sunderland, a town in the northeast of England. It's a seaside town. It's somewhere I love going back to. I am terrified of water, that sense of the unknown, but whenever I go home, I'm always drawn to go back to the sea. Something I really miss in London. I guess the river's a certain kind of replacement for that. It's that idea of being on the edge of something and looking out into this nothing. I think it's really important to have an eye on what's gone before in order to reinvent. Miller's Ophelia it's a very beautiful painting, but it also has this really brutal edge to it. It's kind of like this idea of beauty and death, or is it kind of rebirth and resurrection? You know, this idea of opposites and, you know, whether it's masculine or feminine or light and dark or good and bad, there's a really beautiful kind of tension in that painting and really inspired my first show in Paris. We boiled it all down to its component parts, and the show, every single outfit was white on the front and black on the back, directly referencing that half in, half out Ophelia image in the water. But we also quite like that idea of it being as if all the outfits were spotlit, so you would have, you know, this kind of very bleached, overexposed front and this black behind, or, you know, the idea of the cycle of the moon. I was looking at a lot of very disparate references. So it's kind of by osmosis, I guess I take in things, and I see it a little bit like refracting light through lenses. There's lots of layers of meaning and reference within it, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to tie it down and, you know, say it's just necessarily about one thing. Yeah, historical fashion is definitely something that we look at time and time again. I think it's incredibly important to look back and understand what has gone before in order to be able to invent what the future might look like. It's never our intention to look back and create some sort of pastiche. It's the idea of, you know, the shock of the new. Something that is new is always going to have that oddness to it, and I think oddness is definitely something that we try and imbue in my work. It's like that midpoint between two magnets. You know, there's that undeniable tension there. And I guess it's that midpoint between those two polar opposites that we like to investigate. And the idea of something like the rough, you know, which is something that we've kind of gone back to time and time again. A lot of the things that we do that distort the form of the body are things that are extraneous to. It's kind of almost like a carapace or like a suit of armour, something that sits away from the body. But the thing that I love about the rough is it comes from the body, it explodes from the form. The idea of it being very instantly recognisable as something incredibly historic, but pairing it with something that is totally undeniably not historical. Autumn-winter 2015, it was our first show back in London after 7 years. We were actually thinking a lot about St George, not necessarily nationalism, but it's about this idea of sacrificing oneself to something bigger than themselves. And we kind of sidestepped that with football hooliganism, and we were looking at this idea of tribes. It was kind of our homecoming, so we wanted to do something that really celebrated where we kind of cut our teeth, because like I say, we've been in Paris for 7 years. Even though we worked in London, we would present our work there, and it's a very different vibe, and I felt like we wanted to do something a little bit more, just a little bit more punk, for want of a better word. As an atheist, I certainly enjoy my position or my perspective on religion as very much an outsider. But I do really enjoy, just on a kind of visual level, that the way religious iconography is presented. You know, this idea of the deity or the martyr. I always draw parallels between religious iconography and something like Francis Bacon, this idea of body but perhaps abstracted, but presented in such a way that has a real singularity to it. I think the singularness of religious iconography is the thing that I find most striking. There's not a huge amount of bells and whistles to confuse the image. This idea of looking back and finding a lot of disparate and perhaps unrelated things and putting them all together, kind of melding them into this thing that becomes this new thing. I think that's super interesting and takes it beyond the idea of it being just a reference to a historical fashion or historical costume. It gives us that opportunity to really kind of create something that is new. But more than that, I mean, the thing that really flows throughout everything that we do is this idea of duende. It's something that's rooted actually in flamenco, but it's this moment when a performer on stage, you see it a lot with like someone like PJ Harvey when they're kind of like losing it on the guitar or they're in this kind of zone. It's a very particular zone and it's something that you can't control and it's not something that you can easily replicate, but it's this magical moment where there's this symbiosis between a performer and an audience and everything's right and everything it's the time when you get shivers. And essentially with everything that we do, since we discovered duende, we kind of want the work that we do to have that effect or we want people to have a reaction to it, whether they love it or whether they hate it. We want someone to take something away from the work that we do. So yeah.